If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. This episode is all about eggs. Corbin and I discuss the bum rap eggs have had in the past and how current nutritional science suggests that eggs may be better for you than we have been led to believe. We also discuss why Rocky may have been onto something downing raw eggs in the morning.
So you know what I was thinking about the other day is back when I was doing personal training, a lot of my clients, they would always ask like, well, what can I eat? What should I have? And what's my diet plan? And unfortunately, I was never a certified nutritionist. So legally, I could not give them any advice. But I would always say, well, I'm not a nutritionist, but if it were me, this would be the items that I was choosing. And I was thinking in a podcast of aging well, a lot of people, they want to know, you guys talk a lot about workout and you've thrown in diets such as the Mediterranean diet, but is there anything else that I could have, right? And I would just like to say, I think we have exactly the type of things that they are looking for in this episode of good protein sources. I think that we'll be laying out a few good protein sources. What do you think about that?
I need a drum set.
That's
a great topic. I think that's a good one to start with because eggs are a rather misunderstood protein.
They are, and I think they're underrated. I don't think people fully grasp the concept of how phenomenal eggs are. I actually remember taking your class, and one thing that you said, and it always stuck with me, is out of all of the proteins in this world, they have to come from a measuring system, right? They come on a scale, and the good foundation of that scale is actually eggs, because I believe you were talking about the essential amino acids that we get from the eggs and how it's a nearly perfect blend, and it just kind of sets that bar, sets that standard versus all the other protein sources. Essentially,
eggs have the near perfect balance of amino acids that the body needs. And there's actually a protein digestibility corrected amino acid score.
Whoa.
Known as the PDCAAS, which is considered the gold standard for measuring protein quality. And it's a combination of how well you can digest the protein as well as how it fulfills the amino acid requirements. And if you look at meat actually falls pretty high on the scale, meat and fish. They're usually at about 94%. 90% is considered pretty good. When we look at eggs, though, eggs have a total of 118% on their PDCAAS.
So how does that math add up?
Well, it's based on the fact that eggs have a very high digestibility, and some of that depends upon how they're cooked, from raw to a fully cooked egg. Like a boiled egg makes a little bit of a difference, but it's about 97% on the digestibility scale. But eggs have a extremely high benefit in terms of amino acids. And that is because, you think of hockey and you'd be over 100%. Well, the eggs actually have a much better balance of amino acids than we ordinarily consider in the foods. And so if you really want to get your amino acids, don't spend money on these branched chain amino acid supplements and things like that. Supplement your diet with healthy eggs.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just the branched chain amino acids that we want, but the essential amino acids. And for those of you that don't know the difference, our bodies naturally create amino acids, but the essential ones is what we would get from our diet, from our food. And those are the things that we don't create within our body, and we have to have that. And anyone who's taken a third grade science class knows that amino acids are the building blocks of life.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you did mention is you were talking about cooked versus raw. From my understanding, just basic science or basic chemistry, if you have a protein is almost like a slinky. It's really wound up, and it works properly. When it's wound up, you can go back and forth with it. But when you heat up that protein, it's almost like taking that slinky and pulling it out and stretching it to where it doesn't fully work. Is that going to be the same with eggs based off of cooked and raw?
Yeah, and I'm not as knowledgeable as I'd probably like to be in all of the, whether you call it microbiology or the chemistry behind it all, but the cooking of the eggs does have an effect on the proteins and the various components within the egg. And so there are certain things that we get benefits from cooking the egg, but then cooking the egg also takes away other certain benefits as well. But the main thing is that with the eggs, we want to make sure that to get the best benefit of them, we're cooking them more slowly and not overcooking them. And that takes a little bit better care for some of those, like I think it's referred to as the deamination of the eggs, and some of the other benefits that you get in there from having cooked the eggs. And that also affects when we start talking in terms of cholesterol in the eggs as well. The ability of the white, which, the white contains a lot of the proteins, contains, a lot of these other components that are healthy for us. The yolk is what is kind of really considered the evil part of the egg, and not properly so. That's where much of the cholesterol is. But if you eat the whole egg, whatever might be considered bad in the yolk is actually rather good for us. We have the cholesterol that can make testosterone, estrogen, and the basic anabolic type of hormones that we need in the body. And when we eat just the yolk, we can get too much of that, and that's where if you have cholesterol issues, you might want to avoid eating too many egg yolks. But the white itself has, as I recall, lecithin in it that is beneficial for helping to regulate that cholesterol and break it down so that we use it properly rather than it building up in our arteries.
So I'm glad we're covering this, because I know we just ever so slightly covered it when we were discussing the Mediterranean diet, and we were both huge advocates on that. I believe that one did talk about avoiding the cholesterol, the egg yolk. Now, speaking of egg yolk, if you had the choice of a farm fresh egg, which is more of an oranger yolk, or just the ones that you were to buy at the store, which is almost like Sunny D yellow, which of the two would you prefer?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer if you can get the farm fresh eggs, that haven't been sitting on a shelf, because eggs do, in fact, have a fairly long shelf life. And,
they do.
Especially when they're kind of refrigerated, but in reality, eggs don't even need to be refrigerated. A good farm fresh egg has a reasonable shelf life, just kind of sitting on your counter for a while. And so that's the biggest issue with it. If you have access to farm fresh eggs, which, let's face it, much of America does not, because we live in urban areas or suburban areas and we don't have access to local farms. If you live in a community where you can raise your own chickens, you can have your own eggs. I think the way my son and I eat eggs, we'd probably have to have a pretty big chicken coop in the backyard in order to supply our own eggs. But if you have access to farm fresh eggs, that's always going to be better. If you don't, you're not hugely penalized by having, store-bought eggs. And when we start looking at brown versus white eggs, there's not really even a difference either. And some might not agree with me on this, but when it comes to organic versus non-organic eggs, there's really not that big of a difference either. The differences are really small, and I think when making your egg selection, the excellent thing to do is we're going to have so many egg puns today, I guess. But the thing to do is to really look at the bang for the buck. What can you afford? Mm-hmm. What do you have access to? And take advantage of that. If you can afford and have access to organic, farm fresh eggs, by all means, that's the best way to go. But if you live in an urban area and you have to go down to the local grocery store and all they have are white eggs that, you don't know where they came from, or even how long they've necessarily been on the shelf, as long as they're within that expiration period, you're going to be fine. And I've lived in periods of time where I have not had a lot of money. I think I've mentioned in other podcasts when I had John McGuire on the first time, he talked about my pretty stoic diet when I lived in New York with him. And, I was living, again, this is in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and I had about a $25 a week food budget. And my primary protein source was eggs. And I think at the time you could get like a dozen eggs for about 99 cents in some circumstances.
Wow.
Or you could get like tuna for 25, 50 cents a can, depending on the sale. Chicken was a little bit more expensive, but you could get that cheaply. So I had to kind of look at what convenience-wise and cost-wise what was best. And the egg was one of my primary sources. It was easy to cook. I'd boil up a bunch of hard-boiled eggs for work, and then I'd just have to grab those out of the refrigerator, pop them in my lunch as I'd go into the city and work for my 8-hour shift before coming home. And, it didn't matter to me so much that they were cheap eggs from, I think it was Waldbaum's was the grocery store at the time. But, if I got opportunity to get farm fresh eggs, which on occasion, people at my church would come across some and we could get access to them, then, I'm going for those. Because there is definitely a quality issue when it comes to those eggs. When you get an egg, you can generally tell the freshness of the egg and kind of the quality of the egg if you eat fried eggs and you crack it into the pan and the white really just spreads out and gets really thin. That generally is an indication that it's a bit older of an egg. But again, it's not necessarily bad. It's just not of the freshest of quality. But when you get those really farm fresh ones and you crack them in there and the white stays pretty solid together and you have just that really bright orange yolk, sometimes you get lucky and you get the double yolks. It's kind of like getting a 4-leaf clover. It's the 4-leaf clover of eggs, if you don't mind the cholesterol and you can handle the cholesterol. But it just makes for a better tasting, better quality egg. But we usually tend to season our eggs and do other stuff. I mean, I put tons of hot sauce on eggs. So the
Tapatio saves lives, I'm telling you.
That's like ketchup.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's cheap, it's flavorful, there's no calories. Like it's awesome.
And that's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole nother topic.
About putting hot sauce on your eggs, you're actually helping to boost your metabolism, boost your immune system, and adding some more benefit to those eggs. So, put some hot sauce on those eggs and eat up.
Yep. Well, I think another takeaway that you're discussing is eggs are fairly cheap. Even the can of tuna, which what was that? The fish is on that 90 percentile scale, and eggs are the 108 percentile.
Fish is probably somewhere, and again, it's going to depend on the fish, on the protein itself. But meat and fish is generally between 92 and 94%, whereas the egg on the PDCAAS scale, I wish there was an easier acronym for that, is at 118%.
Right. And what's cool about this is like you can eat healthy. You can get your protein sources. You can get your essential amino acids in on a budget. And I think there's a myth out there that, oh man, healthy food is so expensive. Even I fell for that myth back in college. Like I was like, man, I can't afford some of this stuff, but I could because I was always eating eggs and eggs, spinach, and tapatio was a good staple. Tuna, I ate a lot of tuna. And unfortunately, I ate a lot of top ramen. But going back...
But again, the top ramen it's going to give you your carbohydrate source.
Right.
Not the best, and got a lot of sodium in there. But again, if you're on a budget, better to not eat just the ramen noodles.
Right.
Mix in some eggs with that. At least you're getting some protein with it. You're getting some carbohydrates. But you also have to get some vegetables in there, get some fruits. And then we can talk about, what are some of the other cheap sources. And we talked earlier on that best diet for aging. And one of the top things on the list was legumes.
Right.
You buy yourself a big bag of lentils or some kind of beans. You buy the dry beans. You cook them up. You got a big pot of those. Those are filling. They got decent source of proteins to be a complement to the eggs, but you're not relying entirely on that for protein because those are going to fall very low on that amino acid scale. But it's filling, it's cheap, it's healthy. And then what are your cheap vegetables that you can get the most bang for the buck from? When I was living on that cheap budget, carrots were my go-to because carrots are extremely nutrient dense. They have a very good shelf life, and they have a lot of good nutrients in them. So eggs were good, broccoli, getting into your greens, cauliflower. Those are all relatively cheap.
Right.
We don't have to go fancy. I think a lot of times we just tend to go for the fancy rather than just going for the bang for the buck. And if you're on a budget, stick to the budget.
Right.
Get good stuff. Don't buy the cheap, just ramen noodles. Buy the stuff that is of the best quality that you can afford. And
Right.
eggs tend to be that food. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
And what's cool about that also is a lot of people, yes, it is, if you have the opportunity to get farm fresh eggs, you are going for a higher quality. But as Dr. Armstrong stated, the ones that you find at the grocery store, the white ones, protein is protein. And that's the cool part about it. It really doesn't matter the source of the egg, or if you just want to use a different example like whey protein, for example, it all comes from milk. You're getting that protein is protein. Milk is milk. Well, what you're paying for is name brand.
Protein isn't necessarily protein. As we talk about amino acids, protein is made up of those amino acids. The combination of those amino acids are what give it its better quality, what give it its PDCAAS.
Right.
The choices that we make are going to affect. But overall, again, if you're eating decent quality protein, you're not living on bologna and hot dogs and, highly processed, highly fatty, crappy meats, the stuff that is basically just ground up pig butt or something like that, you are going to get a reasonable amount of amino acids, especially the more variety that you're eating. But the nice thing with the egg is it's got it all there, and you don't necessarily have to worry about the variety and mixing the foods in order to get the appropriate amino acids. And that's a challenge if you're a vegetarian. If you don't have any issues with eating eggs, then you're going to get a pretty good protein source, so you don't have to eat meat. But if you're choosing not to eat eggs and you're trying to rely solely on a plant-based protein diet, it's a lot harder to get all of the amino acids that you need in a proper balance.
Well, speaking of balances, just going back to the myth of protein sources and good quality food can be expensive. There's also the myth that yolk is so dangerous and we should really just focus on the egg white. Now, you mentioned the combination of the two. They kind of counterbalance each other, and we need everything. And what's cool about that is one of the articles that you did send me regarding the importance of eggs, they talked about taking in an entire whole egg helps with skeletal health, weight loss, sarcopenia, immunity, protection against chronic diseases, and a whole lot more, right? Yeah. And so you're getting all of those benefits with just a small amount, like a small fee that's worth so much more. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And the whole sarcopenia piece is very important as we age, because we know that with aging, we have a tendency to lose muscle mass. And much of that is because of inactivity, but some of it also is changes in the diet or the accumulation of a poor diet over time. And as we want to maintain as much muscle mass as we can. It's, we've talked repeatedly about in this podcast that doing skeletal muscle resistance training is important in order to build muscle mass so that we can be more active and maintain that activity for a longer period of time, which further facilitates maintaining the muscle mass, maintaining cardiovascular health. We want to maintain that muscle mass. And we're not all going to be into significant amounts of weightlifting. And, many might not even lift at all. But eating the whole egg can actually help to offset that risk of sarcopenia. And in fact, eating a whole egg has been found to be much more anabolic than eating just the egg whites. And the challenge there is when you're trying to manage body weight, sometimes you're kind of limited in the amount of fat that you can have in the diet, and the fat in that egg may offset your dietary macros a little bit. But we should try and get some whole eggs on a daily basis, because it is going to increase the amount of benefit that we get in terms of holding on to our muscle mass. And just basically what's been found is that whole eggs actually increase the release of mTOR. And we've talked about mTOR, being this really the primary cellular signal for muscular growth. And so the higher the levels of mTOR in the muscle, the more protein synthesis that we're going to have. So if we can stimulate that in ways in addition to lifting weights, we're going to minimally maintain our muscle mass as we age. Optimally, we're going to help to increase our muscle mass as we age, because if we have been inactive, our goal should be to try and increase that muscle mass.
Yeah. Well, and just by increasing muscle mass, in that article from T Nation, simply by enhancing skeletal muscle health, eggs can improve insulin sensitivity, reduce the risk of prehypertension and hypertension, ward off cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis, and in general, reduce overall risk of all-cause mortality. I mean,
reduce cardiovascular risk?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, eggs were evil.
Yeah.
They were causing us to have heart disease for years.
But they're not. It's a myth. And the study and the research that's out there, it reflects the exact opposite. Eggs truly are a great foundation and should be a staple in most of our dietary consumption.
Yeah, the exception would be if you naturally have much higher cholesterol levels to the point of it affecting your arterial health. And that is not as many people as we would tend to think. I think that notion that high cholesterol is the cause of heart disease is increasingly being challenged in cardiovascular science. And it's more the level of inflammation that we have in the vessels, and much of that comes from high sugar content rather than fat or other sources of fat that are damaging the vessels. And so you have damage in the vessel, you have that damage comes from increased sugars in the blood as well as insulin resistance, and that leads to these locations where excess cholesterol and fats and other components of the blood can build up and causes blockages in the arteries. But if we're exercising, we are building muscle, we're using the cholesterol that is present in the egg, it's going to just multiply the benefits.
Well, it's good cholesterol too.
Right. Yeah.
As you mentioned before, it helps with their entire endocrine system to produce the hormones needed in order to age well. Right? You did mention that it lowers inflammatory issues that's produced by just, carbohydrates and other processed things. That article does state that egg proteins also contains several enzymes, each of which put the whoop on various bacterial life processes. They even offer protection against inflammatory bowel disease and seem to suppress tumors of the colon. Egg yolks, protein specifically. So the egg yolks, that good cholesterol that we're taking in, the research that's out there, it is showing that it can protect you against some of that stuff.
Yeah. So how do you like your eggs?
How do I like them?
I'm talking to the guy behind you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can't go wrong with scrambled. I've always liked my eggs scrambled. I like them. I really like them sunny side up, though. I'm becoming a huge fan of sunny side up.
Yeah. Sunny side up meaning soft yolks.
Yep.
Really wet yolk.
Yep. Another way, hard-boiled. Hard-boiled, I think, is a super easy thing, especially when you're meal prepping. I hard-boil a bunch of eggs, and then I throw them in a container, and I'll throw in a good source of vegetables, a lot of greens, either broccoli or spinach or bell peppers and mushrooms. Another thing, if I don't have time for that, I'll throw in a tomato. I really like a hard-boiled egg with tomato, black pepper, and salt. I don't know why. That, to me, is just an amazing combo.
Good. Watch the salt, though. Not too much salt.
Not too much. Just a little bit to enhance the flavor. Like, it's really... Yeah. When I say salt, I'm not dousing it. It's literally just the ever so slightly pinch of it.
And salt's probably another topic we can cover on one of these future podcasts, but because I think salt's another thing is gotten a little bit of a bum rap. But yeah, I like my eggs. I'm a creature of habit. I eat pretty much the same meals on a daily basis at the same times, and so it becomes pretty easy to kind of measure things out. I don't probably eat enough whole egg. I do a lot of egg white. I try and mix in a little bit more whole eggs now in certain meals, but I like an egg white kind of omelet or scramble. I generally put my broccoli in there, and I can eat that. A little hot sauce on it. It's pretty good. Another thing I've started doing, I saw I don't know where I saw it. I saw a video of somebody showing how to you basically put the egg in, let it kind of cook in the pan, almost like you're cooking an omelet. But then you just put a tortilla on top of it, and then flip it over, and then let the tortilla begin to kind of heat up and brown a bit, and then you roll it up, and you got a breakfast wrap. Much easier than those breakfast burritos where the scrambled eggs falling out all over the place. These stick together a lot better. So that's one of my favorite go-tos now for a quick meal.
Man.
If and I've been rushing around a lot more lately, so to get my protein and get some carbs in there, I just do that real quick, maybe have some fruit along with it, and it's pretty good. If you can add the fat, you put a little bit of cheese in it maybe, but I don't need the cheese. I just put a little bit of pepper on there, and I'm good to go. Hard-boiled eggs, that was always really my go-to, because you're right, you can cook up a bunch of those, throw a dozen or so in a pot, boil them gently. I like to boil them slowly. So, bring it to a boil, bring the heat down, let them cook at a low boil for 20 minutes or so. Get a good hard-boiled egg. You don't get that sulfurization, if that's the right word, of the yolk. You don't want the green yolk. You want a nice yellow yolk. But, because when you get that sulfurization, that's where you get the really bad smell to an egg yolk. And you don't want that at work. People don't want you eating, sulfury smelling egg yolks. So, those are good. My biggest challenge with the egg, or a hard-boiled egg, is getting the shell off. That takes sometimes a little bit of an art, and there's different techniques, I guess, to doing that. But that's the biggest pain, and especially if you're taking it with the shell on it to work. I like to have them shelled before I go, so I don't have to sit there and try and take the shell off, and then what do I do with all that shell as I'm trying to eat? But you can also go to places like Costco or Sam's Club that sell already hard-boiled eggs packaged.
Even 7-Eleven sells them.
Then, it's going to be a little bit pricier.
Right.
It is definitely cheaper, but if you are so busy in your life that you can't bother to boil some eggs at some point in the week, as your meal prep, that's the way to go. Or if you're on the go, you're traveling. A lot of times we are traveling cross country or something, and we stop at rest stops and fill up the tank, use the bathroom, and we're hungry. And what do? We go grab junk food.
That would actually be a really cool podcast episode, is healthy diets on the road. I think that would be really cool.
We could play another Willie Nelson song.
We could do healthy diets on the road, feeding my hunger, my mind and body.
Okay, that's not a Willie Nelson song. Maybe it should be. I was thinking more On the Road Again, but I won't sing it because that might mean that we have to, royalty rights or something like that. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, see, I was trying to protect us from royalty rights.
But anything else with the egg?
So what about the listeners that are out there that are so locked on to the cholesterol portion, and they're thinking, man, I've been told through all my years, like, the egg whites are good, but the egg yolk is bad. The research and the studies that are out there, it is overwhelming that we, it kind of shows that eating a whole egg is really good for us. So why not take that risk, right? If you look at the research, the odds are in your favor that a whole egg is better for you than just a part of an egg, right? So why not just get the whole package, eat your darn eggs, and just see how it works for you?
Yeah, so that's how to look at it. We know that the liver can process the eggs and the cholesterol, and they actually use that components of the eggs to manufacture the hormones that our body needs. And if we don't get them from our food, the body's going to manufacture it naturally anyhow. And so, unless you have unhealthy cholesterol levels and the doctor is saying you need to do something to restrict your cholesterol, go at it. Eat the eggs. So did we talk about drinking raw eggs?
No, we kind of skimmed on it.
Okay, so when I was young, I was probably my junior year in high school or so, was when the first Rocky movie came out, and Rocky drinking the raw eggs in the morning really popularized drinking eggs. And there was a big pushback with that because there's the risk of salmonella and other things from eating uncooked eggs. Well, the reality is that risk of salmonella is pretty small. In one article, and we will link all these articles that we've been kind of using throughout the podcast in the discussion notes, but the risk of salmonella is relatively small. I want to say it's like 0.06% or something like that. So that's not really the big issue. Really, the issue in the research comes down to the digestibility and absorbability of the protein. And the reality is, without going into a lot of detail, they're rather similar. The raw egg tends to favor a little bit of protein synthesis opposed to like a boiled egg, but the absorbability of the amino acids is a little bit less. And so it's a little bit of a wash. But I look at it from a convenience standpoint. if you're in a hurry and you're going to have a smoothie or, a protein kind of drink, throw a few eggs in there and get the extra protein. So rather than focusing on maybe just putting whey in all the time, which is a good quality of protein, but maybe not as good as the egg, because remember, we're talking the egg being really the high standard. Throw a couple eggs in there, you get some natural cholesterol, you get the proteins, you get some flavor, it mixes pretty well, and go. If you're really that busy and all you want is protein, and crack a couple eggs into a glass and gulp them down, if you're able to do that, it's not going to cause you a lot of harm. But ideally, I think we want to ultimately cook the eggs, and certainly not just take raw eggs to work and crack them into a glass and drink them in front of somebody else that's eating. You're liable to maybe cause a chain reaction of vomiting with some people. So they're not as bad as we would think. So if you get a little raw egg, don't worry about it.
Would you suggest someone just eat a straight raw egg? I noticed you mentioned throwing it into your shake. Would you suggest throwing it in with a carb source, like oatmeal or fruit or something, or just
I don't know if I would
go straight.
I think the oatmeal might even have a tendency to maybe even further reduce the absorbability of those amino acids.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'd have to really delve into the research with that. I don't like oatmeal in my smoothies anyhow, because it just affects the texture, but to each his own. But yeah, I would put it into more of a balanced smoothie if possible, having some fruits and vegetables, and throw in some green leafy vegetables, throw in some berries, throw in a banana, throw in the egg, and then you have a pretty well balanced quick breakfast that you can take with you and drink in the car, rather than grabbing that donut or pastry or a piece of toast or something, or having a bowl of cereal. You have something that's going to be much more balanced, much more healthy, and quick and easy to drink.
Good to know. Is there anything else that we need to discuss?
I don't think so. I feel like we've talked about the egg quite a bit. We've probably hard-boiled it, and
say we've laid a solid foundation for those trying to get yoked, or get their life cracking.
Oh, jeez, we might stop before the.
Did we beat this?
Okay, now you're going too far, but again, for those who are looking to age well, to age successfully, let's reconsider the egg and look at what it can benefit us in terms of helping to offset some of that, what we perceive to be inevitable sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass, help us to facilitate being more active, building or at least maintaining more muscle mass, helping facilitate our lifting programs and things like that, as we've been promoting for some time now about getting into a resistance training program, and also looking at it from the standpoint of our food budgets.
Right. Affordability is a huge factor on both young phases of life and even in that aging population. So,
and convenience-wise, it's a lot easier and more likely that we are going to eat that protein source if it's easier to cook.
Right.
Steak takes a while to cook. Sometimes, you might not want to fire up the grill when you might be, an elderly person living alone. But, sitting down, having a hard-boiled egg or, scrambling up some eggs, vegetables with it and such is a relatively easy thing to prepare. And they're much more accessible and they're easy to store in your refrigerator. So on that note, I think we can say this egg is cracked and tell everyone to keep aging well.
Age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.